Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you that are joining us from the West Coast. My name is Alexa Eggleston, and I am the Substance Abuse and Addiction Project Director for the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I want to thank everyone for joining the National Reentry Resource Center's webinar on providing effective family-based treatment services for justice-involved individuals. The second webinar in a series that the Reentry Resource Center is sponsoring that focuses specifically on best practices for working with individuals with addiction and mental health disorders who are justice involved. Coming webinars will focus on working with juveniles and individuals with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. For more information on the upcoming webinars and also to view past webinars, please visit the National Reentry Resource Center's website at www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. Research indicates that family and friends can play critical roles in motivating individuals with drug problems to enter and stay in treatment and can strengthen and extend treatment benefits. To talk more about these issues, today we are joined by Dr. Francine Feinberg, who is the Executive Director of MetaHouse, Inc. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Dr. Kathy Eisenhower, the co-founder and Executive Director of Shields for Families. Dr. Feinberg is a national leader recognized for her development of a very successful, truly integrated approach to treatment for women with substance use disorders. The House is a well-established community-based agency that addresses the needs of families headed by women with substance use, trauma, and mental health and physical health disorders. Dr. Feinberg are recipients of several awards. Dr. Feinberg has been honored by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as a national leader recognized for community service in the field of substance abuse treatment. MetaHouse has also received a HUD Best Practices Award and a Children Come First Award. At the federal level, Dr. Feinberg chaired one of the committees that helped write the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration's Treatment Improvement Protocol, otherwise known as TIP, for substance abuse treatment of women that was published in 2010. Dr. Eisenhower founded Shields in 1991 and has worked in the substance abuse and child welfare fields for more than 30 years. Today, Shields is the largest provider of family services in South Los Angeles, operating 30 programs and leading 4 collaborative networks. The organization serves more than 5,000 families each year, employing more than 320 full-time staff with an annual budget of more than $21 million. Guidance, Shields programs have been nationally recognized and used as best practice treatment models by federal, state, and local entities, including the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Federal Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, and the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. In 2005, Dr. Eisenhower was given an Innovator Award from the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment for her work in family-centered treatment. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone knows there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, please type your question into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We won't be answering them until the presenters are done speaking, but we can queue up the questions as they arise. So again, please feel free to ask them as the presenters are speaking. We do our very best to answer your questions, but please understand this is a large webinar, so your question may not get answered, but we can always be in touch after the webinar to make sure that you are connected to the resources that you need and your question is answered. And finally, if you encounter technical or audio problems during the webinar, please call the WebEx technical support at 1-866-229-3239. We understand that there are some technical issues you may not be able to resolve in time to participate in the webinar. For this reason, we are recording the event and we'll be posting the recording on our website. If it isn't there already, it will be there within a few days. And again, the link for our website is www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. We really appreciate Dr. Feinberg and Dr. Eisenhower taking time out of their very busy schedules to be with us today. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Feinberg.
Welcome, everyone. I'll talk a little bit about what is family-centered treatment, give you a general overview, and talk a little bit about its implications for implementation. Family-centered treatment is a term that I think it's been bandied about quite a bit over the years, and in fact, it seems to have different meanings for different people. But in 2007, SAMHSA, through CSAT, did publish a document, and that's what you see up on your screen, which has really served as at least a guide for those of us in the substance abuse field. Now, people don't understand that when you look at this, I did put the website at the bottom of this. This is not written in stone, and that many people have disagreements with it. People detour from the format, but it does give us some basic principles and at least some common language to work from. I think to understand the framework of all this, it's important to have a little understanding of its origins and its assumptions. Talk about that a little bit. The origins of what we now call family-centered treatment or family-based treatment really started with something that we call the relational theory of emotional development and psychology of women. Therefore, what you're going to hear me saying is really very much focused on women. We'll talk about generalizing this to men and to other family members in a little while. But if you have any interest in this, it's a really easy read. It's Jean Baker Miller's book in 1976, and this is really the seminal thing. Her book was called Toward a New Psychology of Women. And just in case you hear different terms, the relational theory, I believe it's now called the relational cultural theory, so you may hear that term. But basically, how this started was with the recognition that the theories of personality development, as we think about what we're going to do with people, are really determined by what we think, quote unquote, is normal. And, in fact, normalcy defines what we're doing in treatment, what social interventions we're going to make, and it also defines our outcomes or our goals. It gives us a direction to go in. But the question comes up is normal the same for both genders, and is normal the same across cultures? The definitions of competence and worth that we see in the traditional theories of development, those developed by Freud, Erikson, Piaget, and so forth, are really based on the dominant culture, which is white and male. And so we tend to value things like the rugged individualist, independence, self-made, being strong physically and emotionally, being very logical. And we tend to think about being different from that in some ways that might be called pathological. So some people started questioning this. They questioned it because it's different in different cultures, and it certainly was questioned because it seems to be different for women. What Jean Baker Miller was theorizing was that perhaps women's sense of self is organized around making and maintaining affiliations or relationships. So she came up with this self-relation theory, and it really stresses emotional development of women. In other words, self through connections. And what theorized was that healthy connections would lead to healthy psychological growth, and disconnections within relationships would be violations in those relationships and lead to problems. If you think about those of you that have been in the substance abuse treatment field for a while, if you think about the way that we did treatment for a long time, I remember a word that we used was detach. And, for example, if a woman was talking about her kids too much, we asked her to detach from her children and to focus on herself. We saw that as a means of not wanting to focus on herself, of deflecting. And she was saying that, no, that's not right. The importance of those relationships are integral to the health of the women. So taking that information around, mid-70s perhaps, we actually did start doing some research on women and substance abuse. And what we found was that, in fact, the substance use was related to the relationships that women had, and especially the relationships with women, with children rather, and with significant others. recently we're starting to find that there's actually a relationship between improved maternal functioning, in other words, the ability to parent, and the prognosis for the mother in terms of substance use, and prognosis for the children as well. If you think about it, if a woman thinks about herself as a mother, and that's the most important role they have, and she improves in that area, it would make sense that that would support society. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, SAMHSA, which wasn't SAMHSA when it started in the late 80s, but started putting out grants for women and children's programs. They were all residential programs at the time. And these are the outcomes that you see on your slide there. And if you look at this, you see that you pretty much get the kind of outcomes that you want. These were programs where women could live with their children in the residential program, and indeed, they started seeing some very, very positive outcomes. The slide that you'll see comes from a publication that I showed you in the beginning from 2007. And it's again, not written in stone, but it gives you at least a snapshot of what we're talking about when we talk about a continuum of family-based services. So what does that mean? If you look at the first, you'll see it kind of starts with a focus on women, because that's where it all started, and includes family issues, at least as a subject for discussion. And, that's not like what we have traditionally called family therapy or relationship therapy. But then it starts changing, and the next box you see a recognition of the women's roles as mothers, and perhaps children, and the care of the children were a barrier to accessing treatment, so therefore they added child care. Then we start getting a little more sophisticated, and we start recognizing the importance of the role of parenting and the well-being of the children in the treatment of substance abuse. And there you start seeing that children are included, they have treatment plans, and they are also getting services. When you get to the fourth box, you start looking at a broad definition of women's roles, and that's the recognition of women as family members and into their children, and how important that is in treatment. And so family members are included. And then in the fifth, which is the most fully blossomed, if you will, you start seeing that the recognition of family unit is a very primary structure in which we live, and the health of the unit really impacts each individual. And if the goal is sobriety, the structure needs to support that sobriety. So in this stage of development for the continuum of family-based services, you actually do treatment plans with every single person in the family. So what does all this mean? How do you make this happen? Family-centered models are complicated. It requires much more than intended program people. You really need an administrative capacity, a willingness to really help your agency in a rather different way. This isn't about just adding services. You need that. There's no question about that. It has to be done. But it's a bigger picture than that. It's a bigger picture than just providing staff training. It involves much, much more than that. There's policies that have to be written. There's structural changes, funding changes. It's something that kind of goes down to the core of the entire agency. But you'll find when you look at agencies that do that, is that they are far more complex. They have different kinds of facilities. They have different equipment. They evaluate things differently. The staffing is different. And it does involve a multidisciplinary team of not just people within the agency, but people from the community as well. And of course, when you start involving all these different people from agencies, there's a lot of coordination that's required across all these systems. Before I said that this isn't just about services, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is, and that has to do with the philosophy behind all this. It's important to ask yourself several questions when you start doing this form of treatment. Answer questions like, what is this thing called treatment? What is it that we believe in our agency about human behavior? What makes people change? How we want to be with each other in our organization. And then, of course, when you start reaching to other family members and to children, the question becomes, who is the client? Is the person we call the identified patient, the person with the substance abuse problem, is the whole thing. Who is it? Who are we working with? And, of course, the question of what services are we going to provide. About what is treatment, here's some of the things you might want to ask yourself. What are you treating? Are you focused on the amount? Are you managing symptoms? Is that the goal? Are you impacting on the neurobiology that addresses brain functioning? If you are, how are you doing that? Is it a cognitive behavioral style? Is it medication? Are you making people aware of their behaviors, raising awareness? Are you focused on the social and psychological consequences of use? Are you focused on how the person defines their role in the world and how they are related to other people? Are you focused on trauma? We all know that trauma is a big part of this. And it may, in fact, underlie the use. Are you focused on the co-occurring mental health disorders that often come with the substance use? Is it all above? And then when you think about these things, and I'm sure there are other questions that people can certainly think about, how do you understand these things based on the person's gender and the culture of the person? That should go to kind of your theoretical approach. And I'm saying this because I think we all have that. I don't know that we all say it or all share it among our team members. And I think it's important to do that. What are we doing? What is it that we do that actually helps people change? The agency approach, one that is very highly structured, is it top-down or is it more democratic? Is it very directive? Is it self-directive? Are you trauma-informed? Are you co-occurring capable? I think these are important questions to ask as you start getting into what we call family treatment. In family treatment model, the focus tends not to be on the tradition of toughness that we've had in substance abuse treatment for a long time. It really means that you're building a culture of trust and allowing the client and family the maximum control over the process. And I think that's an interesting concept when you think about justice-involved people, and Kathy will talk about that a little bit more. As a provider, you are actually a partner with the family. You are not the quote-unquote expert, although you do have expertise, but so does the client. Okay, so you're focused as much on rules and control and consequences, only in what you need to do to keep the organization functioning and people civil with each other. The client tends not to be seen as the problem when the difficulty occurs, that you becomes more reflective. So you have a culture of compassion, collaboration, and partnership with the family, as opposed to the more traditional, if you will, medical model of you're the expert, they're the client, and they're there to be fixed by you. How do you get to this point? I mean, how does one develop kind of belief system? Well, there needs to be certain perceptions, and the perception is that the function of behavior that we see, which is, offensive to others, but certainly detrimental to the people that are doing it, I have to understand that as something that is being done to cope with some underlying issues, usually related to past maltreatment or trauma, that it's not behavior that is meant to be intentionally provocative, although it may seem that way. They're not attitude problems. They're not attempts to get back at you. It's not, often I hear the word manipulative. We have to understand it as coping mechanisms, even if they're poor coping mechanisms. And to believe that the people we're working with are the experts. They're the experts on themselves, and that we are there to partner with them. One of the things that I like to tell my staff is that we have to think about the person in terms of what happened to them, not what is actually wrong with them. In doing that, we provide the maximum level of choice, autonomy, respect, that rather than seeing people as broken or vulnerable, them as partners in this process. And one of our jobs is to help build skills, not just manage symptoms. And again, we can get into a whole other conversation about what that means in terms of a medical model and insurance and so forth, which really is has been put in place to manage symptoms. But that's really not what we're doing. Okay. And the question becomes, what happens when it doesn't work? I know one of the things that we've often gotten into is sort of the quote-unquote blaming or patient blaming. But what I would suggest that the model really pushes us towards a more reflective stance, and that is if something isn't working, the question that really needs to be asked is, what can we do differently, as opposed to what's wrong with the patient. I'm sure many of you have heard, well, he or she just wasn't motivated, they weren't ready, they weren't this, they weren't that. And while some of that might be true, the question is, what can we do to process along? And the next question then is, who is the client? Okay, is it the person that is identified for treatment? Serving other family members, this is a family-centered program, but are we doing it for the purpose of supporting the person who's in treatment, or doing it for the individual growth and development of all the other people that are in the family? And then, of course, that brings up the question of who pays for this. It's a different kind of model, and what skill sets do we need, different than the skill sets that we've had in the past. Now I'm going to show you a schematic that I'm going to go through very quickly, but I'm going to start talking a little bit about the services in the family-centered treatment. And as I said before, we have internal teams and external teams. And this schematic is going to kind of show you a little bit about how this might be set up. So we have what you see in the basement, and everything that you're seeing in this picture, which I don't have to go through right now, people can look at later, shows you the different services that we provide at our organization. Now, it's important to understand that you don't have to do everything yourself. Our experience is that the more we do, the better it is, and that just really has to do with coordination and time and transportation and some very practical issues. But what you'll see here are the things that we do. Now, this is a women's program, and it's a women and children's program. But I think this will apply to family programs generally. And then we're going to build our house, and it's going to look at all the different organizations, agencies that you might end up getting involved with each of these families. So I'm not going to read each of them. I'm just going to flip through them. And then, if you have any questions later, I can certainly answer that. I suspect I can think of other ones as well. You have our whole house. And as you can see, what we're actually doing is impacting pretty much on every aspect of the entire family's life. And keep in mind, another administrative thing in this whole process is that all this has to be coordinated. Let's look a little bit at the internal team. What I have here is an example of various disciplines that we have at our agency, and these are the people that are hired by Maida House. And again, as I said before, not every agency does all this. Many people collaborate with other agencies, but you can see that there's a diversity of skills and people. And, if I had to kind of lay this down, I would say there's sort of the AOTA focus, alcohol and drug abuse focus. There's a mental health focus. There's a physical health focus. certainly all the work that goes on with parenting and children, and then there's things that have to do with living skills and vocational and education, that kind of thing. So the question is, how do you get all these people to work together? How do you build this team? And it's really important to do that because this team has got to operate as one, and this is where leadership and policies become very, very important. Members of the team just have to agree, and they won't always agree, but they do have to operate as a functional family. And it's especially important, or I shouldn't say it's especially important, but what we found is, at least in the early stages, the disagreements and the difficulties as to what is most important really seem to come between those that work with children and those that work with adults. And it's just very important that these become aligned. And so that goes to your hiring. You need a staff that can be a team player. Not everybody can do that. People need to be very flexible. They need to be creative. They need to be able to think for themselves. And people have got to get the message that they need to know what everybody else is doing on behalf of the family. In these situations, conflict's inevitable. It's going to happen. And some of the things that you can do to help that is cross-training. One of the things that we did was simply have people spend time in the other disciplines, actually live the workplace of other people in the agency. Make sure that the supervision stays family-focused. One of the other things that I want to tell people is that when you start working with children, there's emotional attachment that's different than it is for adults. And one has to pay attention to that. It can be emotional. It can be very difficult with the children when things don't go the way that you would like. Some of the things that we added were extra stitchings, we added logs, and any other way that we could communicate better with each other so that everybody knew what we were doing. They're external team, and know that our families are involved in many other systems, and that's sort of good news, the bad news. Good news is that they come with resources, and that when you work together well, you can really do some wonderful things. But these different teams talk a different language. They have different timelines, different expectations, and you really need to get buy-in and trust with other agencies. It often takes the leadership of the agencies to have a conversation so that everybody is working together. Bring training to other agencies about what you do is often very helpful. I'm sure all of you know that we probably work in one of the most stigmatized fields in the world, and so it just really helps for people to learn about the people that we serve. And when it works, it really, really does work well. Some commitment to substance abuse treatment for families is really not business as usual. I think you can tell that from much of what I said. And I had mentioned this really doesn't fit well into our traditional models that we think about when we think about mental models and insurance, because we really shifted our focus from one individual to many people and their roles with each other. Find yourself kind of committed to addressing any and everything that arises in the family, regardless of what you're being paid to do. I often think about it in terms of how it might be if a family moved in with you and you're just kind of in their lives and they have all these things going on. It's difficult to say, well, I will just help you out with this one part on your own with all the rest of it, if the rest of it has nothing to do with the part that you're taking care of. You really have to do pretty much everything that arises and assist in any way that the family wants you to assist. And again, that brings up issues in terms of who the staff is, how all this gets paid for, and how the team works together and works with each other. Slide is there just for information. This is our organization, and it kind of just shows you how we conceptualize all the different things that we do and title them. It's always easy to break these things out because they all interact and interrelate with each other. And much of this will be different depending on whether you're rural or urban, what other kinds of resources there are in the community. But I thought I would offer this because services is certainly a big piece of it, and I think that it's important for people to understand what might come up and what might be needed. Okay. I will turn this over to Kathy, who's going to talk a little bit more and focus this a little bit more on your justice-involved people.
I'm Francine, and thank you for all that information. I just wanted to start off by saying that more than anything, this is a very effective model. As I was sitting here listening to Francine, I was realizing how overwhelming family-centered treatment can be for folks who may not be familiar with this model, because it sounds like a lot of work, and I'm not going to lie, it is. But when you see the outcomes that Francine and I have had the opportunity to see over the years that we've been in this field, then there would be nothing that make me turn around and do anything else. And does this work with justice-involved individuals? Yes, I can firmly say that after doing it for many years myself and providing programming specific to justice-involved individuals coming out of the justice system. So when you're thinking about this, though, I know, again, when I was listening, I'm like, well, in many ways there are some philosophical changes that may need to occur in some of your organizations in order to be able to make this happen. But when you can come with success rates of 80%, when you have families that never return to the criminal justice or the substance abuse treatment system again, you'll realize that this is well worth your time taking a look at. I really do feel that family-centered treatment, the success of family-centered treatment is really looking at the family as your client and recognizing how relationships are really the key factor that needs to be addressed in treatment. I'm going to have a lot of information here on my slides. I'm going to do my best not to read it to you. I'm just going to hit some of the key highlights of this, but I wanted you to have the information so later on you could look at the PowerPoints. Family-centered treatment principles, I know family-centered treatment principles can be applied to all treatment settings. They can be applied to men just as well as they can to women. I have a program where I have single fathers who their children with them in care. And I think that we did a big push for women in making sure that we address all the issues that they have in regards to parenting their children. Online, we not intentionally, but unfortunately forgot that fathers have the same strong feelings about their children, and that we need to design services that were going to accommodate their need to become fathers and reinvest themselves in that role also. I do think this model needs some attention in some specific areas in order to make it more effective for folks that are involved with the justice system. And those are some of the key things that I'm going to hit on this morning or this afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. I'm still in LA, so it's still morning here. Some first steps in doing that are really just recognizing that there are some issues and needs that are specific to this population. And just as Francine stated in her presentation, you really do have to have an agency culture that is going to support the kind of policy, programming, staffing, funding, everything that is necessary to really address, being able to implement a family-centered model for this population. We're going to review some of those issues. I'm also going to go over some of the key things that I think you need to modify in three specific areas: in outreach and engagement, in programming, and in your partnerships. I can't emphasize enough what Francine said about the need to really look at your collaborations and build upon them, and I'll hit on that as we go through this. I think that there are four primary areas where you need to look at adapting the family-centered treatment model in order to have a more significant impact on individuals that are involved in the justice system. And you see the 4 areas listed there: culture, disconnections, multi-system demands, and moving on. I saw some of you asking questions about some of these issues as Francine was talking, and I'm going to hope to address some of that as I go through here. The area that I wanted to talk about is culture, because I think that's probably the most difficult one. There are lots. Everybody brings their own individual culture into the substance abuse treatment setting. We already have what I call a culture of addiction that exists. With justice-involved individuals, I also think you bring in the culture of criminal justice involvement. What I see as some of the 2 key factors with this are trust and control. Trust. I think we need to be honest. Folks who are in justice involved are in continuous situations where they are distrusted continuously. One of the things I always say is that distrust becomes almost normative. And so developing trust is going to be a very difficult process. And so when you are implementing this model, I think that you have to really, truly focus on establishing that trust and doing some programming. I'm going to give you some ideas about that, but that's going to be critical. Again, this model is based on trust and respect, and an issue that I think justice-involved individuals have more difficulty with, having more difficulty learning how to trust because they have been in situations where they have not been able to really trust those around them or have folks believe in them as they move forward. The other piece is control. Again, folks have been in situations where they have not really had control of the decisions that they're making, especially if they've been in custody or they've on parole, probation. There are really other folks making decisions for them. They need to respond to what rules are told them, whatever demands are placed on them, and they have not had the ability to really do their own internal control, their own decision making. Again, with this model, it is based on participants and families making their own decisions. Francine indicated that this is a collaborative model. It's not a behavioral model. We're not here to tell you that you made a wrong decision. We're here to support you in whatever decision you make. I think, again, with justice-involved individuals, this is sometimes a difficult transition to make. Oftentimes, you'll have folks telling you what they think that you want to hear because they've been in situations where that has been the norm, where they have been used to saying what they think is the correct thing that is needed to be said. So part of this issue is really going to be building and building that trust and helping folks to learn that they can have control over the situation. Modifications that I think are necessary to the family-centered model in order to reach this population is, number one, outreach and engagement. Truly reach out early to build a relationship. If folks are in custody, that means making that effort to go inside and do the assessments, to make those linkages begin as soon as possible. If you are unable to get in, I know with a lot of folks that we work with, they start emailing us, and we're emailing back and starting a relationship that way. If there's somebody internally that you can develop a rapport with, again, I think the earlier you can get to folks that are justice involved before they transition to your program, the better it is. It gives you that time to establish that relationship and to engage. I am a firm believer that if you have dedicated staff that focus on building these relationships and connections, that is even better. I know we have at Shields, we have staff that are in the Superior Court, the Juvenile Justice Center, and also the Child Welfare Dependency Courts, just to ensure that relationship exists and that we can access clients, potential clients, as early as possible to start making that linkage. Also, if staff with similar histories, again, if you have folks that have been through the system, have been justice involved, and are in recovery, if you can put that as priority for hiring, I think I truly feel that it's a help in terms of the engagement process, in terms of building that trust with individuals. Programming. There are specific curriculums that do work on building trust and decision making, altering the external control mindset. At the end of these slides, I've listed just a few resources. There are many that are out there, but Hazelton has a nice series. I'm not promoting them, but they do a nice series of curriculums that you can use that really focus on these cultural issues, on the trust and the control issues. I think that if you can build into your program a lot of social activities and events, I mean, some people don't think these are treatment. To me, these are as critical in treatment as anything else. This is where those relationships are built. And I'm a social worker by trade, so that, the basis of our philosophy of social work is that the most important thing in any kind of therapeutic, involvement is the relationship that you build, and that's what keeps the participant in the family and engaged in the services. Councils and leadership activities. I think this is so critical to helping folks establish their internal control again. Put in place activities that allow your families to take on the leadership role, to make them really understand that they are the folks making the decisions. Have them participate in any policy groups that you have. Train them to be advocates on their own behalf. But again, I think that these are things that you must build in if you're going to deal with the trust and control issues. If it's possible, again, lower staff-client ratios. So again, that you can focus much more firmly on that relationship building. Partnering, you'll see I use this term a lot, authentic partnerships. Now that means that you actually know the people that you're working with. One of my lines that I always use is that, agencies do not collaborate, people do. And I hold firmly to that. I think that when you have a true partnership, that you go out of your way to know the folks that are there, that you can talk over things, that you can model the element of a trusting relationship between the two entities that the participants are going to be able to see and feel. I know we partner closely with the Sheriff's Department and on site into the women's jail. And I think that one of the reasons why it works so well is because the participants are able to see that there is a true bond between the staff that are there in the unit and our staff. And so they have been, self-referring themselves because they see that there is that kind of relationship existing. Create activities and events that incorporate your partners. I mean, this can be as simple as having graduations and inviting them, but all different kinds. Have policy groups, have collaborative meetings, things that are going to ensure that your partners get to understand you and what you're doing, and the same back. Encourage, your staff to be a part of that partnership. And then I think that this is what happens, but that there's easy system access. Again, allow participants to be introduced to treatment as early as possible. Co-location of staff is something that I love to do, having criminal justice staff co-located with us or having us on site there. I think that it helps to build that relationship and model what is necessary in order to make this program effective. The second issue is disconnections. And I think everybody who comes into treatment has a lot of disconnections, but when you're talking about justice-involved individuals, I think that some of those can be more severe. If they've been incarcerated, they've been away from their families, even if they had visitation, for sure it's been restricted, and in some places there are no-touch visitation regulations. I know that the most critical piece is when we go into the jails or the prison systems and have parents who have no idea where their children are. And because they're incarcerated, they have no ability to find out. And so those disconnections become critical. I mean, Francine already talked about how important it is with substance abuse, but again, those connections may have been severed for many more years or longer periods of time because of the justice involvement. In terms of addressing that and where you need to focus on altering your model, again, I'm saying outreach early and often again, but now I'm talking about working with the family. I think that if you're able, especially if you've got somebody in custody, if you are working with the family as soon as possible, even prior to the participant entering treatment, if you can help to increase a visitation with the family while folks are perhaps in custody or in other types of settings where they have limited visitation, if you are able to identify where the children are in the child welfare system and help to arrange that visitation, I think those are some critical things to show that you are committed to the family and again, help to build on the relationship with the participant, showing that you're out of your way in order to bring that family back together. Again, I think, you saw Francine's list of staff. You need folks that have expertise in working with family in order to be able to really do the job necessary. In terms of programming, that means that you have to be flexible. I think that you need to be available when families are available, and sometimes that's not 9 to 5. That's evenings, that's weekends. I think you need to look at any policies that limit the age or number of family members enrolled. I know Francine showed you that the continuum of family-based services. And when you get in, you start looking at programs that can take in all the children. I know that's one of the things that we feel strongly about here at Shields. We don't have any limitations on the number of children, the age of children, or what family members become a part of that process and live on site with whoever the identified person is in treatment. But I think that this is something that is really critical, especially with justice-involved individuals, because those ties have been severed. Look at your groups, your curriculums. I think you need to address issues that are specific to the family. Again, on the last slide, I've listed one of the resources that is available, a curriculum for children so that they can start talking about their feelings around separation from their parents, around issues of their parents' substance abuse. But there are many out there, and I encourage you to use the resources that are available at the Reentry Center website, because they're very helpful, I think, in terms of tailoring your programming to this population. She mentioned this again, make sure you have mental health services. There are lots of issues I think that both the participants and then their family are going to need to work through. I think it's critical that you have family therapy available. And in addition to that, my favorite kind of therapy is family activities and events. I'm sure that they are offered regularly as part of your treatment schedule. Again, I think that relationship building is critical to your treatment positive outcomes in your treatment. And the more you can build this in, the better off you're going to be in terms of the outcomes for your families. A lot of times, treatment programs, they get into that the mode of being, we have to do groups, we have to do individual counseling. Yes, those are critical and important, but I believe having these type of events are just as critical to the treatment process. That's where folks learn to develop their social skills and engage with each other again. Here in authentic partnerships, this time I've added on the child welfare system. I think that they are critical. I know in the program that we have specifically for women coming out of the criminal justice system, the child welfare staff on site. I think that this has been really critical in terms of reunification. We have been able to reunify in very short periods of time because I think that the individuals are on site. Their philosophy is consistent with ours. We've worked on building that partnership, and they recognize that reunifying the children is critical to the entire family having a positive outcome, just not the woman who's engaged in treatment. I work on integrating your services, developing the joint plans, and reconnecting the support system for that participant. Make for folks, again, this is where child care, I think, is often critical with this population because of the disconnection. So help to arrange that visitation, monitoring that visitation, doing everything you can in order to make that reunification occur. System demands. Again, everybody that comes into treatment has, many demands from many systems, but when you're talking about folks that are justice involved, often I like to say that they have lethal consequences if they don't meet the demands of other systems. This can include, returning to incarceration, losing visitation privileges. So again, this is something I think that needs to be paid attention to right from the beginning. So how do you do that? I think that we have to be more intentional about asking early what all the different systems are that folks are involved with. Find that out if you can. Find it out before folks come into treatment. If you're unable to do that as soon as possible, get all that information. Learn how to negotiate and barter. Work with each system. Again, this is where those partnerships come in. Because if you are working together, then I think you can be able to negotiate, in essence, your demands and assist the individual with addressing those requirements, as soon as you possibly can. I think that some of those things that you need to take a look at and is to the flexible system. So again, your participants can alter their treatment schedule if necessary, that you provide evening and weekend services, that you arrange for transportation, whatever is necessary in order to be able to meet those other system demands. Looking at your services and how they might need modified, I think some of the common things we see required across systems is, the need for them to take parenting, the need for them to take anger management, the need for them to take domestic violence groups. And sometimes each system has a different set of specifications for what those groups or curriculums must look like or what certification is required to do them. Look and see if you can make sure that what you're providing meets those demands so that, when you're working with a family, they can get what they need right on site with you and you're not having to take them from place to place to ensure that they meet the requirements. And again, this goes back to partnerships and talking to folks and making sure that you're operating on the same page. Back again to these authentic partnerships. If everybody is really having the same underlying philosophy, that working with the family is critical, and that's not always the case, so that takes work to develop that kind of philosophical synergy. But if you can do that, that will assist you with developing some joint plans about being able to negotiate and barter some of those demands so that folks can really focus on their recovery issue. Another piece that I wanted to bring up specifically is in terms of legal services. A couple years ago, we brought on 2 full-time attorneys to work with our families, and I can't tell you what an impact that has had. Because a lot of times folks even coming out of incarceration, they have old warrants, they have, other things that have gotten in their way that really can be addressed with legal services if they are available. If you aren't able to provide them yourselves, there are entities out there that you can partner with that will be able to come on site, provide clinics for you, and at least engage your participants into the legal services. Just finding out what they need to know in terms of expunging their records. Even somebody coming out, if they've got years to wait, at least they know. At least the steps are in place, and they know what to do in order to move on. Again, this really, being deal with these multi-system demands, it falls on the organization or the agency to be able to truly partner with folks. So that, we don't have the lethal consequences occurring. Finally, the last piece that I wanted to focus on was moving on. So, treatment is difficult enough, and so folks get through it. I think that the task of returning to the community is probably much more difficult for justice-involved individuals than it is for folks who are just coming out of treatment with substance abuse as an issue. There are barriers all over the place, barriers to getting aid, barriers to getting housing, to employment, and oftentimes folks get very discouraged. So you see individuals who feel very good about themselves or build their self-esteem in treatment, but then we come to the end of treatment and folks don't see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. And oftentimes that results in feeling like they have to return to their criminal lifestyle to support themselves and their families because they can't find any other alternative. And I think that it's an obligation that we have as organizations to make sure that we can work with folks to address those barriers and not put individuals in situations where they're not going to be able to succeed after they do finish our program. Hopefully by the time that individuals get to the end of treatment, we help them to identify what goals they want, but I think that from the very beginning, we need to be looking at what those potential barriers are and helping to guide folks not, for example, get into trades that are not going to hire them because of their criminal records. And we need to be there to be supportive as they tackle, whatever challenges come their way. I think, again, when we talk about outreach, identify all the barriers that individuals are going to have. And that means finding out their full criminal history, what past charges that they have that might affect employment opportunities down the road. That also means looking at evictions and any challenges that they might be facing. Detailed educational history, their work experience, skills, interests, help them from the very beginning to develop a plan that's going to build upon their strengths and their interests and their desires. Again, being realistic about what is available out there, what will be unavailable because of a potential criminal history, and helping to guide folks in the right manner. That doesn't mean stop your dreams. I've had several individuals go through our program who wanted to be therapists and came right out of the criminal justice system with felony histories. But one of the things we did was to educate them early about what would be necessary in order to reach their dreams and become a therapist and to get a license and what they would have to go through, because that is something that they would have to make sure that they got their record expunged, that they would have to get clearance in order to be able to move on. And I'm happy to say we've had 6 individuals able to accomplish that. But I think that again, they went into it knowing full well what the concerns were, what the barriers were, and walked into it knowing what they needed to do from the very beginning. And because of that, they've been able to make it all the way through and accomplish the goal that they set out. Dedicated staff, particularly around employment and housing. And here's where you really need to look at your educational and vocational component. As Francine said earlier, you don't necessarily have to provide this yourself, but you need to make sure that it is available. I told years ago, I made it a requirement that anybody who graduates from treatment, they must have their high school diploma, they must have computer training, and that's incorporated into our treatment schedule. And it's just as critical as any other group that an individual takes. Again, I firmly that we need to make sure that folks are ready to move on when they leave here. Offer certificate training, educational programs where criminal histories are not a barrier or a challenge. I think that you need to make sure that you have work readiness and job placement, not just job placement, but job support. Getting a job is sometimes not as hard as keeping a job. And so the preparation for that, I think, is critical, again, to success with our families. Offer that support through aftercare. I personally feel like lifetime aftercare is critical, making sure that those relationships stay in place. Again, in terms of legal services, what I was saying before, make sure that by the time folks get out of treatment that they've cleared up everything that they can clear up. and that they can then move on to addressing whatever other barriers are as they process through their careers. Partnerships with non-traditional partners. These are folks that sometimes we do not always partner with in the treatment field, but I think, again, building those relationships with colleges, with training programs, reaching out to employers who will hire individuals with a felony history. There are lots of incentives that are available out there for folks who do hire folks who are reentering the community, and so I think that, again, we have to reach out and go beyond what we normally do in order to ensure that there are positive outcomes for our participants when they move out of the treatment setting. Housing providers that can offer accessible and affordable housing. Again, sometimes folks are hesitant to move someone in with a criminal justice history. I think that building that relationship with your agency can help to address that challenge and move you on. Teacher services, again, as I've said before, if you can move the vocational services on site, that always makes it work better. Advocate with your legal partners, advocate with others in your community. I know that we're working here on bandbox, which is happening over the country, so that we don't have to ask people when they are filling out a job application if they have a criminal history. I was happy to see, as I was writing PowerPoint, that the push to the ban for accessing public housing, a major barrier that has existed here for housing. And so I think that if we advocate together, we can, but I don't think we can ignore the systemic issues, and we do have to focus on them if we're choosing to serve this particular population. Here are a list of just some resources as I've been referencing. And again, these are not everything that's available out there. I just thought that there were some that I felt were particularly good resources, but many that are available to you if you're planning on moving into providing services, family-centered treatment for justice-involved individuals. With that, I'm going to conclude, and I'll turn it back to Alexa for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks to both the presenters who just provided a wealth of information. I have a number of questions queued up, but do want to again remind everyone on the phone that you can ask a question by typing your question into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So I will launch into now the questions that have been asked. As I do that, again, please feel free to submit additional questions. So the first question is directed to Dr. Feinberg, and it's about a house, but I think both of you could respond if you would like, and ask sort of specifically about the participants in Medi-House services and how they are able to inform policy, program design, and implementation.
Okay, so just to clarify, the question has to do with how we involve consumers in decision-making, policy development, and so forth. At Medi-House, is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have several ways of doing that. I know, Kathy, you're going to want to answer this too, because you have a wonderful mechanism in your program. First, Medi-House, there's things that we one is that we hire a lot of our graduates, and so they're naturally impacting. For this too, I think it's important to understand that this is not a top-down agency. I'm the executive director, but I rarely make decisions that impact programming and policy without input from many other people. So those people are giving us input. But we also have constant ongoing focus groups that occur that I do not do. I have other people do that, so people can feel free to say what they need to say, and those focus groups are held not only with staff but with clients as well. In housing, we have a group of people that get together for the purpose of educating us on what we do at Medi-House, how it has impacted them. We do it through and we do it through interviews when people are discharged, whether they liked us or they didn't like us, so that we have a good understanding. We've also started hiring peer support specialists and they're very good at, certainly having had the experience at Maida House. Their role's a little different with our clients, and they're certainly encouraged to, us determine, what that we want to do differently, examine how things have worked. The other thing that we do is look at our outcomes and, just make some decisions about, can we improve that, is this working for us, and so forth. And all of this is brought to clients as well. Could you talk a little bit about the program that you have there?
Okay, well, very similar to Francine. We have 9 treatment programs at Shields, and in those programs there is a client council. There's a body that's the client, and that is a group that's on their schedule every week. And, only no staff are allowed in, and the clients themselves operated that. They elect officers, and they're responsible for specific things within their program. Number one being making sure it works, making sure that they bring to staff, the management staff at the program sites, if there are things that are not working, and doing things like establishing activities, those family activities I was referring to. And in our programs, those are generated and created by the families in the program. It includes identifying things that children can do, as well as whole family activities and family and staff involved activities. Then the officers of each of those particular client councils meet with me 1 month. As meet in another committee called the Activities Committee on the other days of the month that they aren't meeting with me. So the last Wednesday of the month they meet with me. The other Wednesdays of the month they meet on an Activities Committee. They do activity planning across all of Shields. I turned all of our cultural events, all of our holiday events, over to that group, to our consumer group. And so they plan and run all of the events that we have at Shields, from Cinco de Mayo to Juneteenth to any kind of activity that we have. The Consumer Advisory Board also works closely with me to advise me on any kind of treatment issues that are going on, any issues that don't get resolved at the program manager level. They will bring that to me to go over and review, and I have some additional directors that come in and meet with me in order to make sure that we're addressing whatever issues that they bring to us. In addition, they all get additional leadership training. That particular group are trained to be advocates so that they can go testify at hearings locally, state, and nationally. And also, all of my programs are members of a larger group called Sacred Authority out of the Rebecca Project in D.C., where they do advocacy for things such as the Second Chance Act. They've testified in hearings to make sure that pieces of that are passed. Anyway, got to get the idea. I'll stop now. So they're big.
Oh, great. Thank you. The question I'm just going to read verbatim so you get the whole question. It says, I work with a parole reentry court program in San Francisco, a problem-solving court. All of our participants are male, most have substance abuse problems, and many have minor children. How can our program determine which clients would benefit from family-centered treatment?
Well, go ahead, Francine. Okay. You can take over from there.
Okay.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, anybody who has a family, I think, can benefit from family-centered treatment. That's my philosophy. I think all of us need relationships in order to have the support that is necessary, our lives to be able to be well-grounded and successful. For us, the process of moving from doing family-centered treatment where women were the primary participant to having it where men as single fathers were the participant just happened rather accidentally. Not really accidentally. The men said, why can't we do this too? And that's, I guess, some years ago, but it made us really recognize how important those relationships are to men. And as I said earlier, I think that's something that we're realizing more and more. So I don't know which ones would be more effective for. I personally would feel that it would be more effective for everyone that's been. I don't think there's anyone that really chooses to be separated from their family or some other type of support system. So I think these just work with everyone.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add to that. I would certainly agree.
Okay, thank you. What, if any, are the differences between family-centered treatment versus a wraparound approach?
I can take that. Since Brown came out of Milwaukee, it's a good question, and there are different differences. We're actually trained by Wraparound Milwaukee to do part of what we do. So what I'm going to say is that Wraparound Milwaukee is part of what we do, but it is not family-centered treatment in the same way. Keep in mind, Wraparound was set up for youth, and you're working with adults here, and actually some huge differences when it occurs. That has to do with injuries, what people are told, what information is shared, which is very different than when you're working with a child. So it's important to keep that in mind. Family-centered treatment is just that, treatment. Wraparound is not treatment. Wraparound is a process that allows you to put services in place for a family or an individual, depending on how you're doing this. When I say we were trained in Wraparound, the part of that, which I think is going to answer one other question that I think I saw, has to do with how you get all these other agencies involved. And Wraparound trained us in something that we later began calling a single coordinated care plan, or SCP. And many agencies in Milwaukee use this process. And basically, it comes down to an interview with the person who walks in your door to find out what other agencies involved in the person's life. And that expands as you find out other agencies that are involved with other family members. It takes a little investigation because oftentimes people will not remember their child welfare worker from their TANF worker, from their probation officer. They get them mixed up. So it takes a little time to kind of sort all this out and make contact with everybody. But the process involved is that once a month, we all sit down at the same table. And it's the choice of the client and the client's family as to who is going to be at that table. So it's likely to be agencies that are making some sort of demands, so that's likely to be child welfare, TANF, probation. It might be the medical community. It might be a pastor. It might be a support person in the community, certainly the family members. And what comes out of that system, and I'm not going to go into all the detail because it's strength-based and there's a whole process that one goes through, but what comes out of it is a single plan. It's not a treatment plan, but it's a plan that is based on the perception of the family's needs, what they think they need, and who and what system is able to help them with that particular event that's going to take place to help them out. And this is how we coordinate all these different systems. Everybody gets a copy of that plan. You sign off on it when you've completed what you said you were going to do. Our case managers are the people that are responsible for tracking this, for staying on people. Did you get this? Or I talked to the client, she said this hasn't hit yet. Do you want to change this? What it is that you want to do. And getting everybody involved and getting everybody aboard and getting everybody to come is a whole other question. But that is how we were trained by the wraparound process. And it's very, very client-centered. And because we're adults, there are things that are simply not shared. I can remember in the early days being kicked under the table many times by the client. We're not talking about that. But, we're talking about the kinds of things that go on in treatment and the kind of revelations that are made by clients that not everybody really needs to know, even though it might be impacting everything. That's different in the wraparound process. In the wraparound process, everything's on the table. Everybody knows everything. That is the treatment plan. This is a little bit different.
Oh, great. Thank you. Another question. In developing a family-centered approach, we are building in cognitive behavioral therapy models to address a risk of recidivating for some parolees. There is talk of making them mandatory. This seems inconsistent with them being able to make their own decisions. And just a question about your comments.
Okay. Well, I guess I have a question of the question. I'm not sure what is making them mandatory. So are just that you're using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques as a part of your modality. Again, it's about how you build them into the system. If you're choosing a particular curriculum, then I think that it can be helpful. Most of the cognitive behavioral therapy models really support, independent decision making, and so I don't think that they're necessarily inconsistent. Again, in terms of we're saying mandatory, making everybody go through them, I'm not really sure about that piece of it. But again, I don't think that CBT is necessarily inconsistent with the family centered model.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. But I think, underlying this question might be a bigger question, and that is, I don't want to leave, at least for Maida House, I don't want to leave people thinking that it's a free-for-all. There are things that we do and there's things that we don't do, and there's curriculums that we offer and curriculums that we don't offer, and we've made decisions on that. We've researched these kinds of things. The treatment plan for the person, they develop themselves along with their families. Vibes, what things that people take advantage of. If there's something that we just don't offer, then we're going to find that affordable. But it's really not a free-for-all at all. It's really structured. Structure is often what people need, but it's not you must do this or you must do that. People choose it based on their treatment plan.
So they have to participate in some type of treatment, but they're able to direct a little bit what that treatment may look like, so that it would still meet sort of a mandatory requirement as part of a probation.
Well, in treatment, I guess it's mandatory that you're getting some sort of treatment. Yeah. What you focus on and, what treatment you might choose is going to vary based on what you have to offer. But that, when I said we were partners, we have some expertise, and the expertise that we are bringing to the picture. They're just bringing the expertise on themselves. That's part of the partnership.
Thank you. If you to choose generations, which direction do you go? In other words, if the initial client is a 20-year-old with a child, but whose own parents are in the picture, how far do you extend the family-based treatment in your programs?
I can answer that very quickly from Maida House. It's anybody that she chooses.
Yeah, that is the same here. And that doesn't necessarily mean blood relations either. Somebody may have grown up with a god or a play aunt or, whoever it is that person identifies as part of the family system. And I'll go a step further. That's whoever those children identify also. A lot of times parents have been estranged from each other. That doesn't mean that child is part of their service plan, doesn't need a reconnection to that parent that has been estranged too. So it can go all different directions.
Great. And this has actually come up a lot with some of the grantees that we're working specifically with that are working with incarcerated parents and their families, and that is sort of the issue of engaging the family. The question is, what do you feel is the best approach to suggest family-centered treatment to families or participants who have family members reentering the home from jail or prison?
I want to take, I mean, I can talk about it generally, not necessarily for
what is the best mechanism?
Yeah, in terms of approaching either a family in the community who has an individual who's incarcerated and getting them involved in a treatment program, or be just identifying participants for a program that may be available, successful recommended strategies for approaching them about participating in treatment.
I know that in terms of, we'll start with the participant who might be in custody, if you can go into the justice system, wherever that may be, and be able to do orientations, presentations, again, that's where that partnering comes into play in terms of presenting this model. The same with the family on the outside. If they allow you to contact their family, or if you're in the community, you're doing community education to inform folks that this is available. What I always say is that the thing that particularly for women that keeps women out of treatment is the fact that they want to be with their children, and the thing that makes them leave treatment is because they want to be with their children. So generally speaking, if you provide an opportunity for folks to be able to be in services with their families and to assist you with that process, especially for those who have been incarcerated and separated from their families, generally that's not much of a sell that you have to do to them in order to get them into a system where they actually can have their family with them through the process. But again, that whole trust issue, going in and establishing that relationship, I think is really critical. And again, if you have individuals who have been in similar situations and who have went through your program and have had successful outcomes, if they can be a part of your outreach, that is also a really good way to engage also.
Okay, I got a question about sort of from a federal probation system perspective, but I think this is true of just a lot of state systems as well. So I'll go ahead and throw it out there. The question is, in the federal probation system, there has been a movement towards cognitive-based treatment modalities. What do you suggest as methods of getting buy-in, more training from our treatment providers on cognitive-based therapies?
I'm not sure I understand what is being asked. To get training, or
just in terms of getting buy-in from treatment providers in the community as it relates to using cognitive-based treatment therapies and modalities.
Yeah. Well, it's depends on who's doing the treatment. I think many people do use it, but quite frankly, at the risk of sounding crass, if you have to use and that's the only thing you can pay for, then by paying for it, people will use it. But it's a practice that's used very widely in substance abuse treatment. So it might just be a question of finding people who actually do that.
A lot of times, people are practicing cognitive behavioral techniques and don't even realize that.
Well, it could be, yeah. They're not calling it.
Like Francine said, I think that it's a very common technique utilized in substance abuse treatment. And so I don't know what particular models that we're talking about, because there are now many variations on CBT. We have trauma-focused CBT. We have a whole range of them. But again, I think all of them are potentially useful, and I don't know, what treatment providers they might be working with. The providers that are utilizing very much a peer-based model of recovery, or a 12-step model of recovery, and that's not what we're really talking about here in providing family-centered treatment.
Got a couple of questions about funding and how your programs are funded. People, I think, are wanting to have a better understanding of sort of different sources of the programs and the scope of services you're able to provide, and the length of treatment as well.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking and are fairly consistent on this, but there is a document, a companion document actually to the one that Francine showed on the screen at the beginning of the webinar, which is called Funding Family-Centered Treatment. And it goes over all of the resources that are potentially available. I think that, for talking about this can be difficult. You find single sources of funding to do this model. That is perhaps not the most likely way of doing it. Again, originally when these models were funded some years ago under SAMHSA, we'd get enough funding to fully fund all the program components. But now at Shields, I know we use mental health funding, we use substance abuse funding, we use child welfare funding, we use Department of Labor funding. We use whatever funding is out there. I mean, I think that the key thing is, again, back to what Francine and both said, is to have the administrative willingness, really, to be able to take on what is potentially a more complicated way of doing things, to be able to integrate those funding streams behind the scenes so that families aren't affected by it, nor your staff, nor your program, so it doesn't come across as disjointed, but as an integrated approach. Both of our programs, or most of the family-centered treatment, is fairly long-term. Clients stay in our family stay in our programs usually about 18 to 24 months in order to complete the treatment component, and then our model uses housing with treatment on site. And so they'll stay in our housing for another year. So they're usually here about 3 years once they finish the whole process before they move on.
Yeah, for us, I would agree with the funding. We probably have about 30 different funding sources. Good news, bad news. You've got to deal with those funding sources, but because we do so many different things, it attracts many different interests. As far as length of stay, we're quite driven by other funding sources, which includes our county and block grants, and sometimes we don't control this, but we have a continuum of care. So when you say how long someone's in treatment, if they start in our residential program, move into, we also have housing and outpatient. It could be, as short as 4.5 months and as long as maybe 2 years. It just depends, but the intensity changes dramatically.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with that, we are at 3:30, which is the sort of end time for our webinar. I realize there are questions that we did not get to, I didn't have time to get to, I should say, but participants should feel free to reach out to either of our presenters through the websites that are listed, or please feel free to contact the Reentry Resource Center, and we can also field your request that way and find more information to answer your question. I want to remind everyone about the survey that is going to pop up as you close out the webinar, and please ask you to complete that. It is very helpful for us in putting together our webinars. And again, just want to thank both the Bureau of Justice Assistance for sponsoring the and of course, a big thank you to our presenters, Dr. Feinberg and Dr. Eisenhower, for spending this hour and a half, 2 hours with us today. It was really, really helpful, and we got a number of comments as people were signing off that there was a lot of great information presented, and I really appreciated it. And finally, just want to remind those that are still left on the line that a recording of the presentation and slides should be available relatively shortly in the next few days on our website at www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. So thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.